The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly before her, a canvas of white death painted across the prairie. Snow had fallen for 3 days straight, burying the sage and buffalo grass beneath a shroud that sparkled like broken glass in the weak December sun. The wind howled through the pine stands on the distant ridges, a mournful song that seemed to echo the grief lodged deep in Sarah Morrison's chest. She stood alone in the makeshift cemetery at the edge of Cedar Creek Settlement, her black wool dress whipping against her legs. The wooden cross before her bore simple carved letters: Thomas Morrison, 1842 to 1873, taken too soon. Her gloved fingers traced the rough pine, splinters catching on the worn fabric. 3 months. 3 months since the attack on their wagon train, since she'd held Tom's bloodied body in her arms as his life drained into the dusty earth. "I curse them," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Her green eyes, once bright with hope for their new life in the territories, now burned with a cold fire. "I curse every last one of those savages. By God and all that's holy, I'll never forgive them." The words hung in the air like a covenant sealed in ice. Behind her, the settlement of Cedar Creek huddled against the winter storm, a collection of rough-hewn buildings that passed for civilization in this forsaken corner of the frontier. Smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the scent of burning pine and the promise of warmth she no longer felt entitled to claim. Sarah turned from the grave and made her way back through the snow-choked paths between the buildings. The few souls brave enough to venture out in the cold watched her pass with expressions caught between pity and wariness. She knew what they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. Poor Sarah Morrison, widowed at 23, no family to speak of. What's to become of her? Mrs. Elmira Hayes stood outside the general store, her round face pinched with false concern. "Sarah, dear," she called out, her voice syrupy sweet. "You really shouldn't be out in this weather. A young woman alone." She let the words trail off, but Sarah heard the unspoken implications. A young woman alone was prey, a burden, an uncomfortable reminder of how quickly the frontier could strip away everything that mattered. "I'm quite well, Mrs. Hayes," Sarah replied, not slowing her pace. She'd learned quickly that kindness in Cedar Creek came with strings, expectations of gratitude that bordered on servitude, offers of protection from the town's unmarried men that made her skin crawl. Her small cabin sat at the settlement's edge, little more than a one-room shelter Tom had built with his own hands in those first hopeful weeks. She pushed inside and leaned against the door, finally allowing her composure to crack. The tears came then, hot and bitter, freezing on her cheeks almost as soon as they fell. The cabin held too many ghosts. Tom's rifle still hung above the fireplace. His boots sat by the door, waiting for feet that would never fill them again. The bed they'd shared, where they'd whispered dreams of children and prosperity, now felt vast and cold as the territory itself. Sarah wiped her eyes and moved to the small trunk in the corner. Inside lay their savings, pitifully small now after paying for Tom's burial, and the few valuables they'd brought west. Her mother's silver locket, Tom's pocket watch. Not enough to buy passage back east, even if she had anywhere to return to. Their families had disowned them when they'd married against wishes, choosing love over the comfortable marriages arranged for them in Boston society. A knock at the door made her stiffen. She recognized the heavy-handed rapping before the voice even called out, "Mrs. Morrison, it's Jacob Thornton. Wanted to check on you. Make sure you have enough firewood." Sarah's jaw tightened. Thornton ran the largest ranch in the valley, a widower himself with eyes that lingered too long and hands that found excuses to touch. He'd been circling like a vulture since the day they'd put Tom in the ground. "I'm well supplied. Mr. Thornton," she called back, not moving to open the door. "Now, Sarah." His voice took on that patronizing tone she'd come to despise. "You can't keep hiding away in there. The town council's been talking. A woman alone, trying to maintain a homestead. It ain't proper, ain't safe neither. You need a man's protection." Protection. The word made bile rise in her throat. She'd seen his kind of protection. The bruises on his late wife's arms that the woman had tried to hide. The fear in her eyes before consumption had granted her escape. "The only protection I need is from the good Lord and my husband's rifle," Sarah said firmly. "Good day, Mr. Thornton." She heard him mutter something crude before his boots crunched away through the snow. Sarah moved to the window, watching his broad back retreat toward town. The other men would come calling soon enough, each with their own version of protection to offer. The banker Josiah Mills with his soft hands and harder intentions. Pete Garrett, who ran the saloon and thought every woman was for sale if the price was right? No. Sarah pressed her palms against the cold glass, resolution crystallizing like the frost on the window pane. She would not become another frontier tragedy, bartered off to the highest bidder or worse. There were other settlements, other towns where she could start fresh, where Tom's death didn't define her every waking moment. That night, she made her preparations by candlelight. She packed only what she could carry, dried meat and hardtack from the larder, her warmest clothes, Tom's pistol and ammunition, the small pouch of coins and valuables. His rifle she would take too, though it was heavy. Out here, a gun meant the difference between life and death. Her mare, Buttercup, waited in the lean-to stable behind the cabin. Tom had bought the horse from a trader, insisting Sarah needed a gentle mount. Now Buttercup would carry her away from this place of sorrow. Sarah barely slept, starting at every sound, wind rattling the shutters, snow sliding from the roof, the distant howl of wolves. When the first pale light of dawn crept across the floor, she was already dressed and ready. She led Buttercup through the sleeping settlement, her breath and the mare's creating twin plumes of steam in the frozen air. No one stirred. The snow had stopped, leaving the world pristine and deadly in its beauty. Sarah mounted outside the town limits, looking back once at the cluster of buildings that had promised so much and delivered only pain. "Come on, girl," she murmured to the mare, turning toward the eastern road. Fort Laramie lay that way, 5 days' ride in good weather, possibly longer in the snow. But there would be work there, maybe with one of the officers' wives. A new beginning. The first day passed without incident. Sarah kept to the rutted road, though snow obscured much of it. She rationed her food carefully, melted snow for water, and made camp in a grove of cottonwoods as darkness fell. The small fire she risked seemed pathetic against the vast indifference of the winter night. On the second day, she spotted the riders, 3 men, following her tracks through the snow. Even at a distance, she recognized the bulk of Jacob Thornton's form. Her heart hammered as she urged Buttercup to a faster pace, but the mare was already struggling through the deep drifts. The men gained ground steadily. Sarah's hands shook as she tried to load Tom's rifle while riding. The road ahead curved into a stand of pine trees. If she could reach them, maybe. Gunfire cracked across the frozen air. Sarah felt the bullet whistle past her ear, heard Thornton's voice carrying on the wind. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sarah, you're coming back with us!" She fired back wildly, the rifle's recoil nearly unseating her. The trees were close now. So close. Another shot, and Buttercup screamed. The mare stumbled, blood spreading across her flank. Sarah tumbled from the saddle as the horse went down, the rifle flying from her hands. She scrambled to her feet, drew Tom's pistol, and ran for the trees. Behind her, the men's coarse laughter echoed off the hills. They thought her caught, helpless, just another desperate woman to be collected and distributed according to their whims. Sarah plunged into the forest, branches tearing at her clothes. The snow was deeper here, each step a struggle. She could hear them following, taking their time now, confident in their victory. The ground suddenly gave way beneath her. Sarah tumbled down a steep embankment, the world spinning in a kaleidoscope of white and gray and stabbing pine branches. She hit bottom hard, the breath driven from her lungs. When her vision cleared, she found herself in a narrow ravine. Her ankle throbbed, twisted or worse. The pistol was gone, lost in the fall. Above, she could hear the men calling to each other, trying to find a way down. Sarah dragged herself deeper into the ravine, following its winding course. The walls grew steeper, the shadows darker. Cold seeped through her torn dress, numbing her extremities. Still she crawled, driven by desperation and fury. Night fell like a curtain. The voices faded, replaced by the cruel whisper of wind through stone. Sarah finally collapsed beneath an overhang of rock, her body shaking uncontrollably. She thought of Tom, of his promises of a better life, of the children they would never have. "I curse them," she whispered to the darkness, though now she wasn't sure if she meant the natives who'd killed her husband or the white men who'd driven her to this death. Maybe in the end, savagery wore many faces. The cold embraced her like a lover, and Sarah Morrison closed her eyes, ready to join her husband in whatever waited beyond the veil of snow and sorrow. The world swam back into focus through a haze of pain and bitter cold. Sarah's eyes fluttered open to find herself staring at rough stone walls dancing with orange light. Fire. Blessed, impossible fire warming her frozen limbs. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to obey. Muscles locked in the grip of near death. "Don't move!" The voice came from the shadows beyond the fire's reach, deep, accented with the lilting cadence she'd learned to fear. Sarah's heart hammered as a figure emerged into the light. A young native man, perhaps 25 winters, with long black hair bound back from a face marked by wind and weather. He wore buckskin and fur, a knife at his belt, moving with the fluid grace of one born to these mountains. Terror gave her strength. Sarah scrambled backward, her ankles screaming in protest, until her back hit the cave wall. "Stay away from me!" The words came out as a croak through her parched throat. "You savage! You murderer!" The man stopped, his dark eyes unreadable. He held up empty hands, then slowly reached for something beside the fire, a wooden bowl. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of herbs and meat broth. "Drink," he said simply, setting the bowl within her reach before retreating to his previous position. Sarah stared at the offering as if it were poison. This was how they did it. She'd heard, "Gained your trust before." She shuddered, pulling the tattered remains of her dress closer. But the smell of the broth made her stomach clench with hunger, and her throat felt like she'd swallowed sand. "I'd rather die," she spat, though the words lacked conviction. The native man, warrior, her mind insisted on labeling him, shrugged. "Then die," he said in careful English. "I waste no more time on foolish white woman who prefers death to life." He turned away, busying himself with something she couldn't see. Sarah watched him warily, noting the way he moved around the cave with easy familiarity. This was his shelter, she realized. She was completely at his mercy. The memory of her flight came rushing back. Thornton and his men, the chase through the snow, Buttercup falling. How had she gotten here? The last thing she remembered was collapsing in the ravine, ready to embrace death rather than capture. "You—" she started, then stopped. The question seemed absurd. Why would one of them save her? Tom's blood was on their hands, all their hands. The warrior glanced back at her. In the firelight, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, with a scar running along his left jawline. His expression remained neutral, giving away nothing. "I am called Joseph Crowfeather," he said finally. "By the whites, my people know me as Dakota." Sarah said nothing. To speak his name would be to acknowledge him as human, and she wouldn't do that. These were the people who had attacked their wagon train, who had left her a widow before her life had truly begun. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the wind howling outside the cave. Snow had begun falling again. She could see it swirling past the entrance like a curtain of white death. Despite her resolve, the cold and exhaustion took their toll. Sarah's eyelids grew heavy, her body betraying her vigilance. She fought against sleep, terrified of what might happen if she let her guard down. But nature won, pulling her into restless dreams filled with gunfire and screaming horses. She woke to gray dawn light filtering into the cave. The fire had burned low, but fresh wood had been added recently. A pile of furs lay near her, She realized with a start that one had been draped over her while she slept. The thought of the savage touching her, even to provide warmth, made her skin crawl. Joseph sat near the entrance, his back to her, watching the storm. He seemed carved from stone, immovable as the mountains themselves. When he sensed her stirring, he rose and moved to the fire, adding more wood. "Storm grows worse," he said without looking at her. 3, maybe 4 days before it passes. 4 days. 4 days trapped here with one of them. Sarah's chest tightened with panic. She tried to stand, to test her ankle, but pain shot up her leg like lightning. Joseph turned at her gasp of pain. Before she could protest, he knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly gentle as he examined her ankle through her torn boot. "Don't touch me!" Sarah jerked away, her back hitting the wall again. "I said don't touch me! You savage!" His hands stilled, and for a moment something flickered in his dark eyes. Hurt? Anger? It was gone before she could identify it. He sat back on his heels, regarding her with that same unreadable expression. "Your ankle is twisted, not broken," he said calmly. "It needs care or it will grow worse, but if white woman prefers suffering..." He shrugged again, that eloquent gesture that seemed to encompass the futility of her hatred. He returned to his position by the fire, pulling out a piece of leather and beginning to work it with skilled fingers. Sarah watched despite herself, noting the scars on his hands, the way he moved with economical precision. Everything about him spoke of survival, of adapting to a harsh world that killed the weak without mercy. Her stomach growled loudly, betraying her hunger. The bowl of broth from the night before sat cold and congealed where she'd refused it. Joseph glanced at it, then began preparing something new in a small iron pot. Where had a native gotten iron cookware? Probably stolen, like everything else. The smell of cooking meat soon filled the cave. Sarah's mouth watered traitorously. She'd had nothing but a few bites of hardtack in 2 days. Her body screamed for sustenance, even as her mind recoiled from accepting anything from her enemy's hands. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. Joseph looked up from his cooking. "Why what? Why save me?" Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes. "Your people kill whites. You murdered my husband. Why not let me die in the snow?" He was quiet for a long moment, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed older than his years. "My people say the storm spirits led me to you, that leaving you to die would anger them." He paused, then added quietly, "And not all natives kill whites, just as not all whites kill natives." "Liar!" The word came out harsh, bitter. "I saw what your kind did to our wagon train. The bodies..." Her voice broke on the memory. "My kind?" Now there was definitely anger in his tone, though he kept it controlled. "Was it Lakota who attacked you? Cheyenne? Crow? Arapaho? Or do all natives look the same to white eyes?" Sarah faltered. She didn't know. In the chaos of the attack, all she'd seen were painted faces and weapons, heard war cries that turned her blood to ice. The soldiers who'd found them later had simply said hostiles and left it at that. Joseph seemed to read her uncertainty. "I am Shoshone," he said. "My people trade with whites, guide them through the passes. We have no war with your kind." His jaw tightened. "Though your kind make war on us all the same." He ladled some of the stew into a bowl and set it within her reach, along with a piece of fry bread. This time, hunger won over pride. Sarah grabbed the bowl, eating like a starved wolf, barely tasting the food in her desperation to fill the gnawing void in her belly. Joseph watched her eat with something that might have been satisfaction. When she finished, he refilled the bowl without being asked. The second helping she ate more slowly, actually tasting the rich broth, the tender meat, rabbit, she thought, or possibly deer. "Thank you," she mumbled, hating herself for the words even as basic courtesy demanded them. He nodded, accepting her grudging gratitude without comment. The day wore on in tense silence. Joseph worked on various tasks, maintaining his weapons, repairing what looked like snowshoes, tending the fire. Sarah dozed fitfully, her body still recovering from its ordeal. When she woke again, it was dark outside. The storm had intensified, wind shrieking through the mountains like the voices of the damned. Joseph had hung a hide across part of the cave entrance to block the wind, but cold still seeped in around the edges. He offered her more food, dried berries and nuts this time, along with a tea that tasted of pine needles and something else she couldn't identify. It warmed her from the inside out, easing the persistent ache in her bones. "Tomorrow I will look at your ankle properly," he said, breaking the long silence. "The swelling should be down by then. I told you not to touch me. Then you will not walk again properly. Your choice, white woman." He paused, then added with a hint of dark humor, "Though crawling through snow to escape seems foolish." Escape. The word sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the storm. She was his prisoner, wasn't she? Saved from death only to face. What? She'd heard stories of what natives did to captured white women. The thought made her pull the borrowed fur tighter around her shoulders, as if reading her thoughts. Joseph's expression hardened. "I am not what you think," he said quietly. "My mother taught me the old ways, to force a woman." He shook his head. "This brings dishonor to a man's spirit, makes him less than animal." Sarah wanted to disbelieve him, to hold on to her hatred like a shield, but something in his eyes, in the careful distance he maintained, made her uncertainty grow. He could have done anything to her while she slept, weak and defenseless. Instead, he'd covered her with furs and kept the fire burning. Sleep came again, bringing dreams of Tom, but this time, the memories were mixed with images of dark eyes and gentle hands, of safety found in the last place she'd expected it. She woke crying, cursing her traitorous subconscious. The storm raged for 3 more days. Joseph proved a surprisingly considerate captor, if that's what he was. He fashioned a privacy screen from hides when nature's calls became necessary, helped her hobble outside for brief moments when the wind died down. He never touched her more than absolutely necessary, always announcing his intentions before approaching. By the 4th day, Sarah found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. The scar on his jaw, she learned, came from a mountain cat attack when he was barely 16. The intricate beadwork on his shirt had been done by his sister, who died of white man's sickness 2 winters past. He spoke of his family sparingly, but she heard the grief in his voice that matched her own. On the 5th morning, Sarah woke to find Joseph preparing a poultice from herbs and tree bark he'd gathered. The storm had finally passed, leaving the world outside crystalline and blindingly white. Sunlight streamed through the cave entrance, making the icicles hanging there sparkle like diamonds. "Your ankle needs tending," he said without preamble, gesturing to the supplies he'd prepared. "The swelling is down, but it must be wrapped properly if you wish to walk again." Sarah hesitated, her ingrained prejudices warring with practical necessity. Her ankle throbbed constantly, and she knew he was right. Still, the thought of willingly allowing one of them to touch her. "I can do it myself," she said stiffly, reaching for the bandages. Joseph watched her fumbling attempts with what might have been amusement. After several minutes of struggling to properly wrap her own ankle while sitting, she finally threw down the bandages in frustration. "Go ahead," she muttered, hating the capitulation but hating her helplessness more. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he removed her boot and examined the swollen joint. Sarah forced herself to remain still, watching his face rather than his hands. The concentration there, the careful way he applied the poultice before wrapping the ankle with practiced efficiency. It reminded her of watching Doc Palmer back in Cedar Creek tending patients. "You've done this before," she observed, the words slipping out unbidden. "Many times." Joseph secured the bandage with a knot. "Hunting accidents, war injuries. A medicine man taught me when I was young." He sat back, surveying his work. "Try to stand." Sarah gingerly put weight on the ankle. It still hurt, but the support of the bandages made it bearable. She took a few tentative steps, using the cave wall for balance. "Better," she admitted grudgingly. Joseph nodded and began packing away the medical supplies. As he worked, Sarah noticed him favoring his left shoulder, a stiffness in his movements that hadn't been there before. "You're hurt," she said, surprised by her own concern. He glanced at her, seeming equally surprised. "Old wound. The cold makes it ache." Without thinking, Sarah moved closer, seeing now the way he held his shoulders slightly hunched. "From the mountain cat?" "No." His voice went flat. "From Soldier's bullet. 2 summers past." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Sarah retreated to her spot by the fire, unsure how to respond. She wanted to ask what had happened, but the question felt too much like caring, and she couldn't afford to care about one of them. Joseph began preparing their morning meal, the last of the rabbit meat mixed with dried berries and a handful of nuts. Their food supplies were running low. Sarah realized soon he would need to hunt, or they would need to leave this shelter. As if reading her thoughts, he said, "Tomorrow we travel. Your ankle is well enough, and the weather holds for now." Travel where? Fear spiked through her. Was he taking her to his village, to his people? The stories she'd heard rushed back, white women taken as slaves, forced to Fort Bridger. Joseph said calmly, 3 days' walk if weather stays good. You will be safe there with your people." Sarah stared at him, too shocked to hide her surprise. You're letting me go?" His dark eyes met hers steadily. "You were never prisoner, white woman, only foolish person I saved from dying in snow." She should have felt relief. Instead, an unexpected confusion washed over her. All this time, she'd been free to leave. But no, that wasn't true. Her ankle wouldn't have carried her far, and she had no supplies, no weapon, no knowledge of where she was. He could have easily kept her captive, but instead— "Why?" she asked again, the question that had plagued her since waking in this cave. "Why help me at all?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of memory. 2 winters passed, when soldiers shot me. A white woman found me, wife of missionary. She could have called soldiers to finish what they started. Instead, she hid me in root cellar, tended my wound until I could travel. He touched his shoulder unconsciously. She said all life is sacred, that helping enemy makes us better than those who only know hate. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the wall of hatred she'd built. "But my husband, the wagon train—" "I am sorry for your loss," Joseph said simply. "But I did not kill your husband. My people did not attack your wagons. Holding hate for all natives because of what some did, this is like hating all wolves because one took your sheep." The logic was sound, even if her heart resisted it. Sarah watched him bank the fire, his movements efficient and sure. Everything about him spoke of competence, of surviving in this harsh land through skill and knowledge rather than violence. "Teach me," she said suddenly, surprising them both. Joseph looked up, eyebrows raised. "Teach what?" "How to survive out here." Sarah gestured at the cave, the wilderness beyond. "I nearly died because I didn't know how, if you're taking me to Fort Bridger anyway." He studied her for a long moment, perhaps trying to determine if this was some trick. Finally, he nodded. "First lesson, pride kills faster than cold. You live because you found shelter, even rough shelter. But you would have lived easier if you knew how to build proper fire, find food." For the rest of the day, Joseph taught her basic wilderness skills, how to build a fire that would last through the night with minimal fuel, which plants could be eaten even in winter, rose hips clinging to bushes, the inner bark of certain pines, how to read weather signs in the clouds and wind. Sarah found herself an eager student, absorbing the knowledge with desperate intensity. Each skill learned felt like armor against the hostile world that had taken so much from her. Joseph was a patient teacher, correcting her mistakes without mockery, praising her successes with quiet approval. As darkness fell, he showed her how to set simple snares for small game. "Rabbit run same paths," he explained, pointing out the subtle signs in the snow. "Here, where tracks go under brush, Place snare here. Check in morning." They worked by firelight, Joseph's hands guiding hers as she learned to fashion the snares from sinew. The closeness should have repelled her, but Sarah found herself focused on the task, on the warmth of another human presence after so much loneliness. "Your husband," Joseph said quietly as they worked. "He was good man?" The question caught her off guard. No one in Cedar Creek had asked about Tom as a person, only about her status as his widow, her vulnerability without him. "Yes," she whispered. He was very good, kind, gentle. He wanted to build something out here, a life for our children." Her voice broke on the last word. Joseph nodded silently, letting her grief have space. After a moment, he said, "My woman died of fever last spring. We were to marry when summer came." He held up the leather he'd been working on earlier. This was for her wedding dress. The parallel losses hung between them, creating an unexpected bridge. Sarah found herself really looking at him for the first time, not as savage or enemy, but as another human being marked by loss, struggling to continue in its wake. "What was her name?" she asked softly. "Ayana. It means eternal blossom." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She laughed like water over stones, always saw joy, even in hard times. They talked late into the night, sharing memories of lost loves, finding common ground in grief. Sarah told him about Tom's terrible singing voice, how he'd insisted on serenading her anyway. Joseph spoke of Ayana's skill with horses, how she could calm the wildest Mustang with a whisper. When Sarah finally slept, her dreams were calmer than they'd been in months. She woke once to find Joseph keeping watch by the entrance, his silhouette dark against the starlit snow. The sight should have frightened her. Instead, she felt an unfamiliar sense of safety. Morning brought clear skies and preparation for departure. Joseph packed what supplies remained, fashioning a travois from branches to carry their gear. He'd trapped 2 rabbits in the snares, which he efficiently cleaned and packed in snow to keep fresh. "Can you teach me that too?" Sarah asked, watching him work. "How to clean game?" He glanced at her, perhaps surprised by her continued interest. "If you wish. Though white women usually find it distasteful." "I'm not most white women," Sarah said firmly. "Not anymore." Joseph showed her the process, guiding her hands through the necessary cuts. It was messy work, but Sarah forced herself to learn, to overcome her squeamishness. Each new skill was a step away from helplessness, from being dependent on others' mercy. As they prepared to leave the cave that had been her shelter and prison, both, Sarah found herself oddly reluctant. Outside meant returning to a world where Joseph was the enemy, where the growing understanding between them would be crushed by the weight of others' hatred. "Ready?" Joseph asked, adjusting the pack on his shoulders. Sarah took a last look around the cave, then nodded. Whatever lay ahead, she was no longer the same woman who'd collapsed here in despair. The native, no, Joseph, she forced herself to think his name, had given her more than shelter. He'd shown her strength she didn't know she possessed. They emerged into a world transformed by snow and sun, beginning the journey that would take her back to civilization. But as Sarah followed Joseph through the pristine wilderness, she wondered if she was walking toward safety or away from it. The journey through the winter wilderness proved harder than Sarah had imagined, even with her ankle wrapped and Joseph breaking trail ahead of her. Each step through the deep snow demanded effort. By midday, her legs burned with exhaustion and her breath came in ragged gasps that formed clouds in the frigid air. Joseph noticed her struggling but said nothing, simply adjusting their pace without making her ask. They followed a narrow valley between towering peaks, the snow-covered pines standing like silent sentinels. The beauty was breathtaking and terrible, a pristine world that would kill the unwary without a moment's hesitation. "Rest here," Joseph said when they reached a cluster of boulders that provided shelter from the wind. He cleared snow from a fallen log, creating a place for her to sit. Sarah gratefully sank onto the makeshift seat, her ankle throbbing despite the support of the bandages. She watched as Joseph efficiently gathered dry wood from beneath the protective boughs of evergreens. Building a small fire with the ease of long practice. "How far to Fort Bridger?" she asked, accepting the piece of dried meat he offered. "2 days more, if weather holds." He studied the sky with the practiced eye of one who had learned to read nature's moods. But clouds building to the west, another storm comes. Maybe tonight. The thought of being caught in another blizzard sent fear coursing through her. But Joseph seemed unconcerned, methodically checking their supplies and adjusting the travois he'd been pulling. As they ate, Sarah found herself watching him again, the economical way he moved, the quiet confidence that came from a lifetime in these mountains. When he caught her staring, she looked away quickly, heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "We need shelter before dark," he said, banking the fire. "There is place I know, not far, old trapper's cabin. Abandoned now, but walls still stand." They pushed on through the afternoon, the sky gradually darkening as Joseph had predicted. The first snowflakes began falling just as a structure appeared through the trees. A small log cabin, half collapsed but still offering more protection than the open forest. Joseph examined the cabin critically before nodding approval. The roof had partially caved in one corner, but the main room remained intact, with a stone fireplace that would still draw. Gaps between the logs had been chinked with mud and moss, now crumbling but repairable. "We fix what we can," he said, already moving to gather materials. "Storm will be bad, maybe 2 days, 3. They worked together as snow began falling more heavily. Joseph showed her how to mix mud with dried grass to patch the worst gaps, while he used branches and the hide from his pack to cover the hole in the roof. By the time darkness fell, they had transformed the ruin into a passable shelter. The storm struck with a fury that made Sarah grateful for Joseph's foresight. Wind howled through the mountains like a living thing, driving snow against the cabin walls. But inside, the fire crackled cheerfully in the old hearth, and the patched walls held firm. "You knew this was coming," Sarah observed, watching Joseph sort through their supplies. "The storm," he nodded. "The wind spoke of it, the way animals moved, signs everywhere for those who know to look. Tom never learned to read those signs," Sarah said quietly. "He tried, but he was a city man at heart. Boston born and bred, this land bewildered him even as he loved it." "Why did he come west?" Joseph asked, adding wood to the fire. Sarah was quiet for a moment, remembering. "For me, partly. And for freedom. His family wanted him to join his father's banking business, marry the daughter of another banker. But Tom wanted to build something with his own hands, to live somewhere his choices mattered more than his name. And you?" "I wanted—" She paused, trying to articulate dreams that seemed so distant now. "I wanted space to breathe. In Boston, every moment of a woman's life is prescribed. What to wear, how to speak, who to associate with. Out here, I thought we could be ourselves." "But the land took him," Joseph said softly. "No," the word came out sharper than she intended. "Men took him, men with hatred in their hearts and blood on their hands." Joseph was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with memory. "My father was peace chief, believed in trading with whites, learning their ways. He guided wagon trains through the passes, helped lost travelers. One day, soldiers came, said natives had stolen horses. My father showed them our horses, all marked with our brands. Didn't matter. They shot him where he stood. Said all Indians were thieves." Sarah felt the familiar anger stir, but now it was mixed with something else, a recognition of shared injustice. "That's different." "Is it?" Joseph's dark eyes met hers across the fire. "Your husband died for being white in Indian land. My father died for being Indian in what was once our land. Both killed by men who see only enemy, not person." The truth of his words sat heavy between them. Sarah pulled her knees to her chest, staring into the flames. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small cabin, a different kind of tempest was building, one that threatened to sweep away certainties she'd clung to. "I can't just forgive," she whispered. "I can't forget seeing him die." "No one asks you to forget," Joseph said, "but carrying hate like heavy stone, this only makes your journey harder." does not bring back dead. They lapsed into silence, each lost in thought. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself stealing glances at Joseph again. In the firelight, the harsh planes of his face softened, making him look younger, more vulnerable. When he caught her looking, something passed between them, a moment of connection that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "You're cold," he observed, noting her slight shiver. Before she could protest, he rose and brought another fur from their supplies, draping it around her shoulders. His hands brushed her arms as he adjusted the covering, and Sarah felt a jolt of sensation that shocked her. She pulled back quickly, confusion and guilt warring in her chest. "I'm fine," she said stiffly. Joseph retreated to his side of the fire, but Sarah remained acutely aware of him, the way he moved, the sound of his breathing, the space between them that suddenly seemed both too great and not great enough. What was wrong with her? This was one of them, the people she'd sworn to hate, and yet sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of strong hands and dark eyes, of safety found in unexpected places. She woke to find the storm still raging and Joseph gone. Panic seized her until she heard movement from the lean-to attached to the cabin. He was tending to necessities, giving her privacy to do the same. The second day in the cabin tested them both, confined in close quarters. The tension between them grew, not hostile, but charged with something Sarah couldn't name. They talked to pass the time, sharing stories of childhood, of dreams deferred and loves lost. Joseph taught her words in his language, laughing at her pronunciation but patient with her attempts. "What does that mean?" she asked after he'd said something in Shoshone while fixing a torn seam in his pack. His eyes flickered to hers, then away. Nothing important. But the way he said it, the slight color in his bronzed cheeks, made her suspect otherwise. She found herself wondering what thoughts ran behind those dark eyes, what he saw when he looked at her. That evening, as they shared their meager meal, their hands touched as he passed her the water skin. The contact lasted only a moment, but Sarah felt it like a brand. She jerked back, dropping the skin, water spilling across the dirt floor. "I'm sorry, Sarah." It was the first time he'd used her name, and the sound of it in his accented voice made her freeze. "You shake like frightened rabbit. I will not harm you." "I know," she whispered, and realized with shock that she did know. Somewhere in the past days, fear had transformed into something else entirely, and that terrified her more than any threat of violence. Joseph cleaned up the spilled water without comment, but the air between them remained charged. When night fell again, Sarah lay wakeful on her side of the fire, intensely aware of every sound he made, every shift of his body. Her own treacherous flesh seemed to pulse with awareness, with a longing she couldn't acknowledge. Tom had been dead only 3 months. 3 months, and here she was, feeling what? Attraction? Impossible. It was gratitude, nothing more. Gratitude mixed with the confusion of close quarters and shared danger. But when morning brought clear skies and Joseph announced they could continue their journey, Sarah felt a pang of something that might have been disappointment. One more day to Fort Bridger. One more day before they would part ways forever, returning to their separate worlds where this strange connection between them could not exist. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Joseph touched her arm gently. "Your ankle, is it strong enough?" The concern in his voice nearly undid her. Sarah nodded quickly, not trusting herself to speak. But as they emerged into the crystal morning, she couldn't help wondering which would prove harder, the physical journey through the snow, or the emotional journey away from feelings she could neither understand nor accept. The final day of their journey began under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Fresh snow glittered like diamonds scattered across the world, and Sarah found herself memorizing every detail, the way Joseph's breath misted in the cold, how the morning sun caught the blue-black shine of his hair, the patient way he adjusted his pace to match her still limping gait. They had spoken little since breaking camp, both seeming to sense that words would only complicate what lay between them. but as they crested a ridge at midday, Joseph stopped suddenly, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Sarah asked, following his gaze to the valley below. "Smoke," he said quietly. "Wrong color for chimney fire. And there," he pointed to dark shapes against the snow. "Deathbird's circle." Sarah's blood chilled. Even from this distance, she could see the unmistakable forms of vultures wheeling in the sky. Joseph studied the scene with narrowed eyes, reading signs she couldn't perceive. "Soldiers," he said finally. "Maybe 2 days past. Attack on village, Cheyenne. From the signs." His jaw tightened. Women and children there. They descended carefully, Joseph moving with increased wariness. As they drew closer, the scope of the devastation became clear. What had once been a small winter camp lay in ruins, tipis burned, belongings scattered, bodies half covered by merciful snow. The vultures reluctantly gave ground as they approached. Sarah's stomach heaved at the sight. These weren't warriors fallen in battle. She saw a woman's body sheltering 2 small children, an elderly man with his hands raised in a gesture of peace, frozen forever. The soldiers had shown no discrimination in their killing. "My God," she whispered, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Why? Why would they?" "Because they could," Joseph said flatly. His face had become a mask, but she saw the fury in the rigid set of his shoulders. "Because to them, we are not people, just obstacles to be removed." He moved through the carnage with grim purpose, checking for survivors, though clearly expecting none. Sarah followed numbly, her mind struggling to process the horror. This was what the soldiers called pacifying hostiles? This slaughter of innocents? Joseph paused by one of the bodies, a young woman about Sarah's age, her beaded dress torn by bullets. Gently, he closed her sightless eyes and murmured something in his language. When he straightened, Sarah saw moisture on his cheeks that wasn't from the cold. "Did you know her?" she asked softly. "No, but she is someone's daughter, someone's sister, maybe someone's wife." He looked at Sarah then, and the pain in his eyes was terrible. "This is why my people fight, not from hatred, but from desperation. When your choice is die fighting or die on your knees." Sarah thought of her own hatred, her curse against the savages who had killed Tom. But looking at this massacre, she wondered who the real savages were. The soldiers who had done this wore the same uniform as those who were supposed to protect settlers, the same men she would have run to for safety. "We should leave," Joseph said, but he was looking at something near the edge of the camp. "Wait." He moved quickly toward what looked like a collapsed shelter. Sarah heard it then, a weak sound, barely audible. Joseph dropped to his knees, carefully moving debris aside. A moment later, he lifted out a small bundle, a baby. Somehow, impossibly, alive. The infant was wrapped in rabbit fur, perhaps 6 months old, weak from cold and hunger but breathing. Joseph cradled the child with surprising gentleness, checking for injuries. "Boy child," he said, "strong to survive so long." He looked up at Sarah. His mother must have hidden him before. Sarah moved without thinking, pulling off her shawl. "Give him to me." When Joseph hesitated, she added firmly, "I know how to care for babies. My sister had 3. Joseph transferred the infant carefully. The baby was light as a bird, his dark eyes focusing on Sarah's face with that intense way of babies. Despite everything, he didn't cry, as if he'd learned already that silence meant survival. "We can't leave him," Sarah said, though she knew the complications this would bring. "He'll die. Fort Bridger soldiers will not want Indian baby," Joseph warned. "They might." He didn't finish, but Sarah could guess. An orphaned native child would be seen as a burden at best, a future enemy at worst. "Then we don't take him to the soldiers," Sarah said, surprised by her own vehemence. "There must be someone, a family, missionaries maybe." Joseph was watching her with an unreadable expression. "You would do this, save Indian child?" The baby's tiny hand had found her finger, gripping with surprising strength. Sarah looked down at the innocent face, then around at the slaughtered camp. He's not an Indian child. He's just a child. Something shifted in Joseph's eyes. He nodded slowly, then began gathering what supplies they could use from the ruined camp. A cradle board, some dried milk, clean cloth for diapers. Sarah watched him work, marveling at how gentle his warrior's hands could be. They left the Valley of Death behind, the baby secured against Sarah's chest beneath her coat. The child's warmth against her heart stirred feelings she'd thought frozen forever. When they stopped to rest, Joseph prepared a thin gruel from the dried milk, showing her how to feed the infant small amounts. "You've done this before," she observed. "Many babies in my village." "Everyone helps?" He smiled slightly. "Warriors must know all skills, not just fighting. How else to teach sons?" The casual mention of children, sons, sent an unexpected pang through Sarah. She and Tom had dreamed of filling their cabin with children. Now those dreams lay as dead as the bodies in the valley below. As afternoon wore toward evening, they spotted Fort Bridger in the distance, wooden walls and fluttering flag promising civilization and safety. But Sarah found her steps slowing, reluctant to reach their destination. Once they entered those gates, the strange intimacy of their journey would end. Joseph would return to his world, she to hers. "Sarah!" Joseph had stopped, turning to face her. "Before we reach Fort, I must speak." She waited, heart suddenly racing. The baby made a small sound against her chest, reminding her of the warmth of life in a cold world. "These days with you." Joseph seemed to struggle for words. "You are not like other whites. You see with clear eyes, learn with open heart. Your spirit is strong." "Joseph, let me finish." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I know you grieve. I know you hate my people for your loss. But hate is like winter. It kills everything it touches. You deserve spring again." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to stop hating. It's all I have left of him." "No." Joseph's voice was gentle but firm. "You have memories of love, of laughter, of dreams shared. These are what you carry forward. Hate is not honor to dead. Love is—" The baby stirred, making a small, hungry sound. Without hesitation, Joseph prepared more of the gruel, his movements efficient despite the emotion of the moment. As Sarah fed the child, she felt something crack open inside her chest, the ice of hatred beginning its slow thaw. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Go back to your people?" He nodded. "My mother grows old. She needs her son." He paused. "And you?" "I don't know." It was honest. The thought of returning to Cedar Creek, to Thornton and the others, made her skin crawl. But where else could a widow go? "Maybe I'll find work at the fort, or with a family heading further west." "You could—" Joseph stopped himself, looking away. "What?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, "You could come with me." The words hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Sarah's breath caught. For a wild moment, she let herself imagine it, learning his ways, living among his people, raising the orphan baby as their own. "You know I can't," she whispered. "Your people would never accept me, and I'm not ready. Maybe I'll never be ready." Joseph nodded, his face carefully neutral, though she saw the flash of pain in his eyes. "I know, but I wanted to speak the words, so they exist between us." They completed the final distance to the fort in silence. At the gates, Joseph stopped. "I cannot go closer. Soldiers might shoot first, ask questions after—" Sarah understood. This was goodbye. She turned to face him fully, the baby between them like a promise of what might have been in another world. "Thank you," she said, knowing the words were inadequate. "For saving my life. For teaching me, for—" Her voice broke. Joseph reached out, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. "You saved yourself, Sarah Morrison. I only showed you the way." He looked down at the baby. "Take good care of him. Teach him both worlds so he can walk between them. What should I call him?" Joseph thought for a moment. "Samuel. It means Heard by God. He was heard, even in silence. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Joseph stepped back, his hand rising in farewell. Then he turned and walked away, back toward the mountains that had sheltered them, back to his own world. She stood watching until he disappeared among the trees, the baby warm against her heart. Only then did she turn toward the fort gates, toward an uncertain future. But as she walked, Sarah realized the burden of hatred she'd carried for so long had shifted, replaced by something more complex but infinitely lighter. The possibility of forgiveness, of understanding, of spring after winter's grief. The gates of Fort Bridger closed behind Sarah with a finality that made her heart sink. The sergeant who'd admitted her had taken one look at the baby in her arms and shaken his head in disgust. "Indian brat," he'd muttered. "Should have left it where you found it." Now Sarah stood in the muddy courtyard, surrounded by the sounds and smells of civilization, horses, leather, unwashed men, cooking fires. After days in the pristine wilderness, it felt suffocating. Samuel stirred against her chest, whimpering softly. He needed proper food and warmth, needs that overshadowed her own discomfort. "Mrs. Morrison?" She turned to find a familiar face. Lieutenant James Crawford, who'd been part of the patrol that found their wagon train. His expression shifted from surprise to concern as he took in her appearance, torn dress, wilderness-weathered face, and most shocking of all, the native baby in her arms. "My God, what happened to you? We heard you'd left Cedar Creek. But," his eyes fixed on Samuel, "is that—" "I found him," Sarah said firmly. "His family was killed by soldiers. He's just a baby." "Lieutenant." Crawford's face hardened. "Must have been the Cheyenne camp. They've been raiding supply lines." He seemed to catch her expression. "It's war, Mrs. Morrison. Unfortunate, but necessary." "Necessary?" Sarah's voice rose. "I saw that camp. Women, children, elders with their hands raised in peace. You don't understand how things work out here." Crawford interrupted. "These savages killed your husband? Or have you forgotten?" The words hit like a slap, but Sarah stood her ground. "Not these people, and not this child." Crawford sighed, suddenly looking older than his 30 years. "What do you intend to do with it? Him? Find him a home. There must be someone. The missionary couple, the Wheelers, might take him. They're fools for charity cases." He paused, studying her more closely. "You look exhausted. Come, I'll arrange quarters for you tonight. Tomorrow we can sort this out." Sarah followed him to a small room in the officers' quarters, grateful for the privacy. She tended to Samuel, fashioning a better feeding system from supplies Crawford grudgingly provided. The baby ate hungrily, his dark eyes never leaving her face. A knock interrupted them. A woman entered, middle-aged, with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. "I'm Martha Wheeler," she said, her voice gentle. "James said you might need assistance." Over the next hour, Martha proved herself an angel. She helped bathe Samuel properly, found clean clothes that would fit him, and produced fresh milk from the fort's dairy. All the while, she asked no judgmental questions, simply accepting Sarah's brief explanation of finding the child. "You've been through an ordeal," Martha observed, watching Sarah's tender care of Samuel. "Yet you saved this child. That speaks well of your heart. I couldn't leave him," Sarah said simply. "After what I saw," Martha nodded slowly. "The violence grows worse each season. My husband and I try to build bridges, but hatred runs deep on both sides." That evening, Sarah joined the Wheelers for supper in their modest quarters. Reverend Paul Wheeler was a thin, earnest man who listened gravely as Sarah recounted her story, edited to omit Joseph's role, saying simply that she'd sheltered in caves and abandoned cabins during the storms. "Providence guided you," Reverend Wheeler said when she finished, "and brought you to this child for a purpose. We could take him," Martha offered, though Sarah heard the hesitation in her voice. "We've raised several orphan children, both white and native, though it's becoming difficult The fort commander dislikes our work with the Indians. As if summoned by the mention, a sharp knock announced the arrival of Major Harrison Crenshaw, the fort commander. He entered without waiting for permission, his cold gray eyes immediately fixing on Samuel in Sarah's arms. "I hear you've brought a savage whelp into my fort, Mrs. Morrison." Sarah's arms tightened protectively around the baby. "I've brought an orphan child. Major." "Same thing." Crenshaw's scarred face twisted in distaste. "Nits make lice, as they say. That baby will grow up to kill soldiers like the one who sired him." "You don't know anything about his father," Sarah protested. "I know enough." Crenshaw turned to the Wheelers. "And you two, I've warned you about this bleeding heart nonsense. The only good Indian is Major Crenshaw." Reverend Wheeler interrupted firmly. "We are civilians engaged in Christian charity. You have no authority. I have authority over everything that affects the safety of this fort." Crenshaw snarled. "And harboring future enemies definitely qualifies." He looked back at Sarah. "You have until tomorrow noon to get rid of it. After that, I'll handle the matter myself." The threat in his words was unmistakable. After he left, Sarah sat shaking, clutching Samuel close. The baby, sensing her distress, began to cry. "He means it," Martha said quietly. "Harrison Crenshaw's family was killed in a raid 15 years ago. His hatred has only grown since." "Then what do I do?" Sarah looked between them desperately. "I can't let him hurt Samuel." Paul and Martha exchanged glances. "There might be a way," Paul said slowly. "A freight wagon leaves tomorrow morning for South Pass City. You could travel with them, take the child somewhere safer. But where? I have no money, no connections." "Actually," Martha interjected, "that might not be true." She disappeared into another room, returning with a letter. "This came 2 weeks ago. We didn't know where to forward it." Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately. Her aunt in San Francisco. With trembling hands, she opened the letter. Her aunt had heard of Tom's death, was offering Sarah a home, even a position helping with her dress shop, a lifeline she'd never expected. "San Francisco is very far," Paul warned, "and traveling with a native child, there will be difficulties." Sarah looked down at Samuel, now peaceful in her arms. She thought of Joseph's words, "Teach him both worlds." Maybe in a city like San Francisco, that would be possible. "I'll go," she decided, "if the freight company will have me." The next morning came too quickly. Sarah had barely slept, making preparations and saying farewell to the Wheelers, who'd provided her with supplies and a small purse of traveling money. "Our Christian duty," Martha insisted when Sarah protested. At the freight office, she faced new challenges. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Ezra Holbrook, looked skeptical when she approached. "I don't take unaccompanied women," he said flatly. "Too much trouble." "I can pay," Sarah said, showing him the money. "And I can work, cook, tend injuries, whatever's needed." Holbrook's eyes narrowed as he noticed Samuel. "That a breed baby?" "He's my responsibility," Sarah said firmly. "He won't cause trouble. It ain't the baby I'm worried about. It's what others might do seeing a white woman with an Indian child." He spat tobacco juice into the mud. "Though I suppose my wife's been poorly. Could use help with the cooking. And Doc Prentice is traveling with us. His wife might appreciate female company." Hope sparked in Sarah's chest. "Then you'll take us?" "Against my better judgment." Holbrook counted out the coins she offered. "We leave in an hour. You miss it. You're on your own." Sarah hurried back to gather her few belongings. As she was leaving the fort, Lieutenant Crawford intercepted her. "You're making a mistake," he said urgently. "That baby, it's not natural. What you're doing, people won't understand. Then I'll find people who do," Sarah replied. Crawford caught her arm. "I cared for Tom. He was a good man. He wouldn't want this for you, raising his enemy's child." Sarah pulled free, anger flashing in her eyes. "Tom was a good man, which is exactly why he'd understand saving an innocent child." She adjusted Samuel in his cradleboard. "Hatred didn't die with my husband, Lieutenant. I almost let it die with me. I won't make that mistake again." She left Crawford standing there and made her way to the wagon train. Already she could see the looks, curiosity, disgust, confusion as people noticed her burden. The journey ahead would be difficult. She knew. But as Samuel gurgled contentedly against her chest, Sarah felt a strength she hadn't known in months. Near the supply wagons, she noticed something that made her heart skip. A figure in buckskin at the edge of the tree line, barely visible. Joseph, watching to see her safely away. Their eyes met across the distance, a moment of connection that said everything words couldn't. Then he was gone, melted back into the wilderness that had brought them together and now pulled them apart. "Mrs. Morrison," Holbrook called. "We're moving out." Sarah climbed aboard the wagon assigned to her, settling among the supplies with Samuel secure in her arms. As Fort Bridger fell away behind them, she didn't look back. Ahead lay the long road to California, to a new life neither she nor Tom had ever imagined. But she carried with her more than just a baby and meager possessions. She carried Joseph's teachings, his gentle strength, and the knowledge that even in the darkest winter of the soul, spring could come again. The healing had begun not with forgetting, but with choosing love over hate, life over death, hope over despair. The wagon train had been traveling for 3 days when the riders appeared on the horizon. Sarah's heart froze as she recognized the lead figure, Jacob Thornton, his bulk unmistakable even at a distance. Beside him rode 2 other men from Cedar Creek, their intentions clear in the grim set of their faces. "Trouble coming," Ezra Holbrook muttered, raising his rifle. Around them, the other wagon drivers prepared their weapons, sensing danger. Thornton and his men stopped just outside rifle range. "Sarah Morrison," he called out, his voice carrying across the prairie. "You've got something that belongs to the good people of Cedar Creek." Sarah clutched Samuel closer, the baby whimpering at her sudden tension. Doctor, Prentice's wife, Clara, placed a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I belong to no one," Sarah called back, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "You're Tom Morrison's widow," Thornton replied, moving his horse closer. "That makes you our responsibility, and we sure as hell don't let our women run off with savage whelps." Holbrook spat tobacco juice and leveled his rifle. "The lady's paid her passage. That makes her under my protection. You boys best move along." Thornton's laugh was ugly. 3 against 12? Those ain't good odds. Oh, man. But Holbrook didn't back down. "Every man here knows how to shoot. You want to test us?" The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Samuel began to cry, the sound carrying clearly in the still air. One of Thornton's men, Pete Garrett from the saloon, shifted nervously in his saddle. "Jake, maybe we should—" "Shut up!" Thornton snarled. Then, to Sarah, "This ain't over. You can't run far enough to escape what you are. A white woman who's betrayed her own kind. We'll be watching." They wheeled their horses and galloped away. But Sarah knew it wasn't finished. Men like Thornton didn't give up easily. That night, Holbrook posted extra guards, and Sarah barely slept, starting at every sound. On the 5th day, her fears materialized. She'd gone to the nearby stream to wash Samuel's clothes when she heard horses approaching, before she could run. Thornton emerged from the cottonwoods, alone this time. "Finally got you separated from your protectors," he said, dismounting with deliberate slowness. "Now we can discuss this reasonable-like." Sarah backed toward the water. Samuel strapped to her back in the cradle board. "There's nothing to discuss. Leave us alone." "Can't do that." Thornton advanced, his eyes cold. "See, you've made me look weak. First refusing my protection, now this abomination with the Indian brat." "People are talking. I don't care what people say." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "You should care. Your husband's dead because of them savages. And here you are, nursing one of their spawn like it was your own." Sarah tried to pull free, but his grip was iron. "Let go of me." "Drop the baby," Thornton ordered. "Drop it, and come back with me. I'll tell everyone I rescued you, that the savages forced you to care for it. You can still have a respectable life." "Never." Sarah's free hand fumbled for the knife at her belt, one of Joseph's lessons she'd taken to heart. Thornton saw the movement and laughed. "You think you can—" The arrow took him in the shoulder, spinning him away from Sarah. He screamed, clutching at the shaft, as Joseph materialized from the trees like an avenging spirit. The Shoshone warrior had another arrow knocked before Thornton could reach for his gun. "Sarah, are you hurt?" Joseph asked in English, never taking his eyes off the wounded man. "No, Sarah's voice shook. "How are you here?" "I follow. Make sure you reach safety." His bow never wavered as Thornton writhed on the ground. "This one. He troubles you before." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. The relief of seeing Joseph warred with terror at what might happen next. If Thornton died, every white settlement would hunt them. "Please," Thornton gasped, his face pale with pain and fear. "Don't let him kill me. Sarah, please." Joseph looked to her, waiting. In that moment, Sarah held the power of life and death, understanding suddenly the weight of such choices. She thought of Tom, of the massacre she'd witnessed, of all the hatred that perpetuated the cycle of violence. "Let him go," she said quietly. Joseph frowned. "He will bring others." "Maybe, but killing him makes us no better than those who killed the innocents in that camp." She knelt beside Thornton, checking his wound with the medical knowledge Clara Prentice had been teaching her. "The arrow needs to come out, but you'll live. Consider this mercy more than you would have shown." Joseph lowered his bow reluctantly. Together, they removed the arrow and bound Thornton's shoulder. The man watched them with a mixture of pain, fear, and something that might have been confusion. "Why?" he asked as Sarah helped him to his horse. "Because someone has to break the cycle," she replied. "Go back to Cedar Creek. Tell them I died if you want, but don't follow us again." Thornton rode away without looking back, slumped in his saddle. When he was gone, Sarah turned to Joseph, drinking in the sight of him. He looked thinner, worn by hard travel. "You've been following the whole time?" He nodded. "Could not let you go into danger alone. My spirit would not rest." "Joseph." Sarah's voice broke. The relief of seeing him, the knowledge that he'd risked everything to protect her, overwhelmed the barriers she'd built. Without thinking, she moved toward him. He caught her as she fell against his chest, Samuel between them. For a moment, they stood there, her face buried in his shirt, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and pine. His arms came around her carefully, as if she might break. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. "I tried to stay away," Joseph admitted, his voice rough. "But my path keeps leading back to you. The spirits laugh at my plans." Sarah pulled back to look at him, seeing her own tangled emotions reflected in his dark eyes. "I can't ask you to give up your people, your life. You ask nothing. I choose." His hand came up to cup her cheek, work-roughened fingers impossibly gentle. "Where you go, I follow. If you send me away, I go, but my heart stays with you." The baby gurgled between them, breaking the spell. Sarah laughed shakily, adjusting Samuel's position. "We're quite a trio, aren't we? A widow, a warrior, and an orphan. Family comes in many forms." Joseph said seriously, "This child needs mother, needs father. Perhaps spirits bring us together for him." They heard horses approaching, the search party from the wagon train, alerted by Thornton's horse returning riderless. Joseph tensed, ready to disappear again. "No," Sarah said firmly. "No more hiding. If we're to have any chance, any hope of a life together, it has to be in the open." Joseph searched her face. "You would claim me? Knowing what it costs?" "I've already paid the price of others' expectations," Sarah replied. "I won't live in those chains anymore." The search party burst through the trees, rifles raised. Holbrook was in the lead, his weathered face grim until he saw Sarah safe. His eyes narrowed as he took in Joseph's presence, the protective way they stood together. "Mrs. Morrison, you hurt?" "No, Mr. Holbrook, Joseph, this man, saved me from Thornton." She lifted her chin, meeting the wagon master's suspicious gaze. "He's been protecting us. I'd like him to travel with us," the other men muttered among themselves, hands tight on their weapons. Holbrook studied Joseph with the calculating look of a man who'd survived by reading others correctly. "You speak English?" he asked. "Yes," Joseph replied simply. "You willing to work? Hunt for the train? Scout ahead?" "Yes." "And you understand that any trouble, any sign you're leading us into ambush or bringing your people down on us, and I'll shoot you myself?" Joseph nodded. "I understand, but my people are not your enemy, and I give my word, no harm comes to this wagon train through me." Holbrook was quiet for a long moment. Then, "A man's word is all he's got out here, Indian or white." He lowered his rifle. "You can ride with us, but you earn your keep, and you cause no problems." The relief that flooded through Sarah made her knees weak. As the men dispersed, grumbling but accepting Holbrook's decision, she felt Joseph's hand brush hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth spreading through her chest. That night, around the campfire, the atmosphere was tense but not hostile. Joseph had brought in 2 deer, earning grudging approval from the hunters. He sat apart from the others, but Sarah made a point of bringing him his meal publicly, Samuel in her arms. "Thank you," she said softly, settling beside him despite the stares. "For everything." Joseph accepted the plate, his eyes warm. "You are a brave woman, Sarah Morrison, braver than many warriors." "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "I feel terrified most of the time. But when I look at Samuel, when I think about the future we could build..." She trailed off, afraid to voice dreams that seemed too fragile for words. "Tell me," Joseph urged gently. Sarah looked out at the vast prairie, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I imagine a place where Samuel can grow up knowing both worlds, where he doesn't have to choose between being Indian or white, but can be both, where we..." She stopped, heat rising to her cheeks. "Where we can build something new." Joseph finished, "Not Indian way or white way, but our way." "Yes," Sarah breathed, her heart racing at the possibility. "Is that foolish?" "All dreams seem foolish until they become real," Joseph replied. He shifted slightly, his shoulder touching hers. "In San Francisco, they say many peoples mix. Chinese, Mexican, all kinds. Maybe there is room for us too." Us, the simple word held such promise, such hope. Sarah let herself lean into his warmth. Samuel peaceful between them. Around the campfire, people still watched with suspicion and judgment. The road ahead would be difficult, dangerous, filled with those who would never understand or accept them. But under the vast Wyoming sky, with Joseph solid beside her and Samuel breathing softly in sleep, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since Tom's death. Not just hope, but certainty. They would face whatever came together. They would create their own path, forge their own family, build their own world. The curse she'd spoken over Tom's grave seemed like another lifetime, another woman's words, that Sarah had been consumed by hatred and grief. This Sarah, forever changed by winter storms and unexpected mercy, chose love instead. It wasn't betrayal of Tom's memory. She realized it was honoring the best of what he'd believed in, that people could change, that love could bridge any divide, that the frontier offered not just danger, but possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, she sat with the man who'd saved her in more ways than one, their future spreading before them as endless as the prairie itself. The mountain pass lay shrouded in early morning mist. 2 weeks into their journey from Fort Bridger, Joseph scouted ahead while Sarah rode in the wagon with Samuel, who had grown stronger each day under her care. The other travelers had gradually accepted Joseph's presence, his hunting skills and knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. But acceptance was fragile, as they discovered when riders appeared through the mist, a cavalry patrol, 20 strong, led by a captain whose face bore the hardened lines of Indian campaigns. "Wagon train, halt!" The captain's command rang out sharp and clear. "We've had reports of hostiles in the area." Holbrook reined in the lead wagon, his jaw tight. Joseph, who'd been riding point, sat perfectly still on his horse, knowing any sudden movement might prove fatal. The captain's eyes fixed on Joseph immediately. "You there, Indian," State your business." "He's with us," Sarah called out, climbing down from the wagon despite Clara Prentice's restraining hand. Samuel rode secure in his cradleboard on her back. "He's our guide." The captain turned his cold gaze on her, taking in the native child she carried. His expression darkened. "Ma'am, are you aware you're harboring—" "I'm aware I'm caring for an orphaned child and traveling with a man who saved this wagon train more than once," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Captain Morrison," the officer introduced himself, and Sarah's breath caught at the shared surname with her late husband. "And you are—" "Sarah Morrison," she replied, lifting her chin, "widow of Thomas Morrison." Something flickered in the captain's eyes. "Tom Morrison, of the Boston Morrisons. You knew him?" "We served together briefly at Fort Laramie." The captain's expression softened marginally. "I heard about the attack. My condolences." His gaze shifted to Joseph, hardening again. "But this doesn't explain why you're traveling with one of them." "Because one of them saved my life when one of us tried to force me into an unwanted marriage," Sarah said firmly. "Because this man has more honor in his smallest finger than most I've encountered. Because—" Gunfire erupted from the rocky slopes above. Not the cavalry. An ambush. Warriors. Painted for war, descended from hidden positions. But these weren't Shoshone. Joseph shouted something in another language, his face grim. "Blackfoot War Party," he called to the soldiers. "They come for horses, supplies." Chaos exploded. The cavalry wheeled to meet the attack while wagon drivers scrambled for cover. Joseph grabbed Sarah, pulling her beneath a wagon as bullets and arrows filled the air. Samuel wailed, terrified by the noise. "Stay down," Joseph ordered, then rolled out from cover, his bow in hand. Sarah watched in terror as he engaged the attackers, not fighting the soldiers, but the Blackfoot warriors. She saw the moment of confusion in both forces as they realized the Shoshone warrior was defending the wagon train. The battle was fierce but brief. The cavalry's disciplined fire and Joseph's deadly accuracy from unexpected angles broke the attack. As quickly as they'd come, the surviving Blackfoot melted away into the rocks. In the aftermath, Sarah emerged to find Joseph standing over a wounded warrior, speaking rapidly in what she now recognized as Blackfoot. The dying man spat words back, his eyes filled with hatred even as his life ebbed away. Captain Morrison approached, his uniform torn and bloodied from a grazing wound. "Your Indian fought with us," he said, seeming almost puzzled. "My name is Joseph Crow Feather," Joseph said quietly, turning to face the officer. "These Blackfoot are enemies of my people, but I did not fight for you or against them." "I fought for her," he gestured to Sarah. "For the child, for the innocent ones who should not die for others' wars." The captain studied him for a long moment. Around them, soldiers tended wounded and secured the perimeter. 3 wagon drivers had been killed, along with 2 soldiers. It could have been much worse. "You could have used this attack to escape," the captain observed, "or turned on us when we were distracted." "What honor is there in that?" Joseph asked simply. Captain Morrison was quiet, then extended his hand. "The Army could use scouts like you. Paid position, official papers that would let you travel freely." Joseph looked at the offered hand, then at Sarah. She held her breath, knowing what this could mean: legitimacy, safety, a way to move through the white world without constant suspicion. "I go where she goes," Joseph said finally. "If she travels to San Francisco, that is my path." The captain's eyebrows rose as he took in the full implication. He looked between them, the widow he'd known as a fellow officer's wife, the warrior who'd just helped save the wagon train, the native child Sarah carried as her own. "Tom was a good man," he said slowly. "He believed in judging people by their actions, not their birth." He dropped his hand, but his tone was less hostile. "I won't stand in your way, but others will. You know that?" "We know," Sarah said softly, "but we choose our own path." The captain nodded curtly and turned to his men. "Mount up. We'll escort the train to South Pass." That night, as they camped under military protection, Sarah found a quiet moment with Joseph by the stream. Samuel slept peacefully in her arms, exhausted from the day's terrors. "You could have accepted his offer," she said. "Army Scout is an honorable position, but not my calling." Joseph skipped a stone across the water. "I was warrior for my people. Now." He looked at her and Samuel. "Now I am protector of different tribe. Small tribe, but mine." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, taking his hand, the first time she'd initiated such contact. His fingers intertwined with hers, strong and warm. "I curse the savage," she whispered, echoing the vow she'd made over Tom's grave. "But you've shown me the only savagery was in my own heart. The hatred I carried is gone?" Joseph asked gently. "Transformed," Sarah corrected, "into something I'm still learning to understand." She looked up at him, moonlight silvering his features. I think Tom would approve. He always said the frontier would change us in ways we couldn't imagine. You honor his memory by living, not by hating." Joseph said, "This is wisdom your husband would understand." Samuel stirred in his sleep, one tiny hand grasping at the air. Joseph reached out, letting the baby's fingers curl around his. The sight, warrior's hand cradling infant fingers, broke something open in Sarah's chest. "I love you," she said, the words emerging as naturally as breath. "I don't know when it happened or how, but—" Joseph's kiss silenced her, gentle as morning mist but carrying the promise of mountain storms. When they parted, Sarah saw her wonder reflected in his eyes. "My heart knew before my mind accepted," he said. "You are my heart's home, Sarah Morrison." They sat together as the camp settled for the night, planning a future that seemed impossibly bright. In San Francisco, they would marry. Joseph knew a mission priest who performed such ceremonies. Sarah's aunt would be shocked, but Sarah suspected she'd come around when she saw their happiness. Samuel would grow up with two people's wisdom, bridging worlds with the innocence of childhood. The next morning brought clear skies and renewed purpose. As the wagon train prepared to move out, now under cavalry escort, Sarah noticed changed attitudes among their fellow travelers. The battle had shifted something. Joseph was no longer the Indian, but the man who'd fought beside them, bled with them, helped save them. Dr. Prentice approached as they were loading supplies. "My wife and I have been discussing," he said carefully. "When we reach San Francisco, we're establishing a medical practice. We could use a nurse, someone with steady hands and a cool head. You've shown both, Mrs. Morrison." Sarah's breath caught. "You'd hire me, even with—" She gestured to Joseph and Samuel. "Good help is hard to find," Prentice said gruffly, "and any man who fights that fierce to protect innocence is welcome at my table." He nodded to Joseph. "Both of you." As the doctor walked away, Sarah felt Joseph's hand on her shoulder. "You see? New world begins already." The wagon train rolled on, leaving the battle site behind. But they carried with them something more precious than gold or supplies. The fragile beginning of understanding, of bridges built across chasms of mistrust. 3 weeks later, as they descended the final slopes toward California, Sarah stood at a rise overlooking the vast expanse of their destination. Joseph stood beside her, Samuel secure between them. The baby had spoken his first word that morning, "Ma," reaching for Sarah with absolute trust. "No more cursing the savage," Sarah murmured, remembering her bitter vow in that frozen cemetery. "Only blessing the love that found me in the wilderness." Joseph's arm came around her, pulling her close. Her body betrayed her oath in his arms, he said softly, surprising her with the poetic phrasing. But really, oath betrayed her first, kept her from seeing truth, that love knows no tribe, no color, only heart calling to heart. As the sun set over the Pacific in the distance, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Sarah knew their journey was far from over. There would be challenges, prejudices, those who would never understand, but they would face them together. A widow who'd learned to love again, a warrior who'd found a new people to protect, and a child who would grow up knowing that family was not about blood but about choice. The wagon train moved on toward the golden promise of California, carrying with it a love story that defied every boundary their world tried to impose. And in that defiance lay hope. For Samuel, for themselves, for all who would come after, seeking to write their own stories on the vast canvas of the American frontier. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you listening from? Please comment below and let's connect with fellow listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah and Joseph's journey. Did their love story touch your heart as it touched mine?